Welcome to Podnutz Pro episode number 3. The long-awaited Podnutz Pro episode that people just keep asking me about. They just can't get enough of it. This is what I hear on the streets. What's Podnutz Pro, you ask? It is the show for, people interested in getting into IT support for like small businesses, enterprise stuff, as opposed to residential, which is what we mainly cover in the other Podnutz shows. So this is a great stepping stone, or if you're already into doing the small business stuff, we're going to cover a lot of stuff that you guys would appreciate there as well and enjoy. Let me introduce the co-host, Matt Rainey from ahcomputers.com, ah-computers.com. What's up, Matt?
Not too much, Steve. How you doing?
Pretty good. And I got to adjust your video there, so bear with me for a sec. Also joining us, take it away, man. What do you want to talk about today? You got some stuff lined up for us?
Yeah, I think what we want to talk about tonight is DNS. DNS scares a lot of people just getting into business support. A lot of people will, before they get into business support, maybe buy a book on Windows Server. They've got a whole chapter of DNS, and it puts you to sleep in 2 seconds.
Well, you know what? The first thing is, I'll be the dumb dude here. Can you tell us what the initials mean? What's the acronym?
Domain naming service,
Okay.
I believe. Yeah,
I think it's domain name system.
System. Yeah, that sounds good. But it's what DNS is what tells when you have an IP address, it maps to the name. Podnutz.com. It maps to an IP address.
Okay.
So DNS is the system that maps numbers to names.
Exactly.
So you don't want to remember an IP address. Nobody's going to remember 68.42.17.37. Podnutz.com is relatively easy to remember. So that's the system in place for that.
Can I just give an example that people might be able to relate to right now? For example, WikiLeaks, their site has technically been taken offline, but you could still get to the site if you knew their IP address. So does that mean that the DNS has been disabled for WikiLeaks.com, for example?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. The company. Yeah, that's been in the news. The company hosting their DNS basically pulled their DNS records.
Okay. But their site is still up live on a server, so you can get to it if you knew the IP.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So yeah, and we'll cover this, but your site's hosted one place. The DNS just tells everybody where it is.
Gotcha.
So the hosting didn't get pulled down, just the records that tell everybody where the hosting is.
Cool.
So DNS, you get that book. It's complicated. They cover a lot of things in there. As far as small businesses, almost all of it is worthless.
Really?
You don't need to know. I mean, there's a little bit, and you need to know what DNS is and what it's supposed to do. But everything in the books, if you're trying to learn small business server for small businesses, you can almost skip the whole chapter.
Why?
Well, when you install small business server, there's only going to be a couple of things that it asks you. One is domain name, and domain name is what your group of computers with the common name. So if we do an example, let's just use Podnutz. Podnutz has a website, podnutz.com. Your domain name is different than your email domain or your web domain. So when you install in small business, it says, what is your domain name? So you're going to put in an 08 server, small business server. You're going to put in, let's say, Podnutz.
Okay.
Or, the business name. And it's going to append on the back of that .local, L-O-C-A-L.
Right.
It's not going to be .com or .net. It's going to be .local.
Okay.
So your server, let's say you name your server. Your server's name will be server.podnutz.local.
Okay.
So it asks you, what's your domain name? What's your server name? I think it asks you Of course, you need an IP address for it, a local IP address, a private IP address, something like 192.168.1.1. And then it's going to want to know what your ISP, I think ISP DNS servers are. And what that's going to do is that's what it's going to ask you. And it just sets up DNS for you. So now you have your server. The domain name is Podnutz. The full domain name is podnutz.local. So when you go to the process of joining your computers to the domain, which we're not covering now, but when you go to the process of joining them, let's say computer 1, you join to the domain. There's a certain process you go to. So now that computer is part of the domain. The full computer name might be computer1.podnutz.local.
Okay.
Built in the small business server, behind the scenes, it's going to do everything you need to do. Everything you need to set up is going to be set up for you when you go to the process of joining the computer. And we'll cover that later, but another show. But as far as DNS records go, you don't have to create a DNS record for computer 1. You don't have to do any of that. The server's doing that for you. So internally in your domain, DNS is almost a non-issue.
Gotcha.
It's behind the scenes. It's just gonna work. Now, if you're going into someplace that you didn't set up, there are ways to screw it up.
Screw up the DNS?
Yes. Even though you didn't really have to put in much information, it's easy to screw up. The most common way I've seen is screwed up, is your server, your small business server should be your DHCP server, meaning that's going to be the computer that gives all your other computers their IP address. And the reason you want your server to do this, most people have in a home, is going to be your router doing it.
Okay.
In a business, you want your server doing this because when your server gives an IP address to a computer, it also puts that in DNS for you. So you don't have to create it. The server says, I gave this computer 192.168.1.5. The computer name is computer 1. I'm going to throw that in DNS. So now everybody on the network knows if they try and ping computer 1, I'm going to return 1.5 for them. So and it's all behind the scenes. It just works.
So there is DNS being used. It's just something you don't have to worry about because this small business server does it for you. Right.
And so the part in setup where it asks you what your ISP DNS servers are, what happens is if you go to a computer, a workstation, even the server, if you do an IP config, and I'm not sure if you want to find out what your IP information is on a certain computer, you go to command prompt, start run CMD, you get to a command prompt, you type in IP config /all. It's going to give you your IP address. It's going to give you subnet mask, default gateway. It's going to give you DNS servers. It's going to give you if DHCP is on or not. So in this instance, in a typical small business server, or the way it should be, is your DNS server is going to be your server's IP address.
Okay.
So if your server is 192.168.1.1, your DNS server is going to be 192.168.1.1.
Okay.
That way, anytime you ask for any name, it asks your server. Since your server is aware of all of your computers, if I ping computer 2, the full computer name is computer2.local, or computer2.podnutz.local.
Right.
In our example. The .local, the server knows that's me. That's not somewhere else. That's not on the internet. That's me. That's local. It looks in its records. It returns the IP address.
Okay.
Let's say you want to go to google.com. It uses the ISP's DNS addresses. So it says, I don't know what google.com is, and it just sends the request off to your ISP servers. Basically, I mean, there's some things going on, but basically, whatever you put in for your DNS is called DNS forwarders, which is what you put in for your ISP DNS addresses. It just goes out and asks the public IP address for that.
Okay.
Basically, I mean it's not technically how it works, but that's what it's doing. It's using your ISP DNS servers or whatever DNS servers you put in, OpenDNS or whatever.
Okay.
Now, one thing I've seen as a problem is if your server's giving out public DNS addresses. So if your server through DHCP is giving out, let's say, OpenDNS DNS addresses. So if you do an ipconfig/all on your workstation and you get a public DNS address, you're going to see problems with name resolution. Can't find the server maybe. It might take a really long time to log in.
Why would your server do that? What would possess it to do that?
It's somebody putting something in. I'm not sure what they're doing.
Gotcha. Okay.
So, most of the time, I walk into
Right. And the only one should be your server's address. Because if the server doesn't know if you're making a request for a name and that name is not a .local computer, it's going to send the request off.
Okay.
So
I see.
And the problem with using like a router for your DNS server is your router routers sometimes don't really, well, they don't work as well as the small business server. Your small business server is keeping a lot of different records other than, okay, 1.5 is computer 1, 1.6 is computer 3. It's got other types of records, which we don't need to get into, but there's service records. There's other kinds of records that the server's aware of that the router is not. So I've seen issues if you're using your router's IP address for DNS. I'm seeing issues if they're giving out a public DNS address for DNS. Those are problems. And that's usually what goes on when DNS is screwed up on the local network.
Okay.
So that can be fixed. So DNS usually is not a problem on the domain. DNS more, what you should learn about it for, is to troubleshoot things like connectivity to the outside world. So if I can't connect to a website, if I'm having trouble emailing somebody, that's more when you're going to use DNS troubleshooting tools.
I see. I see where you're getting at. You're saying, don't concern yourself. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth. Don't concern yourself with worrying too much about it when you're setting up your own network, but you are going to need to be familiar with it for the public stuff.
Right,
okay.
Basically. So to set up your, one of the benefits, the main benefit of using small business server is Exchange. So you have to know how to set up your own DNS records so people can email you. And then, of course, you need to know how to troubleshoot DNS when you're trying to email somebody or you can't get to a website. So let's say when you're setting up your own server. First, you're gonna have to do, and normally what happens is if I go to a client and they've been using Gmail, I'm gonna want them to use Exchange. So the first step is we've got to register a domain name because they don't have one more than likely. So you pick a domain name with them. You pick somebody who you're going to register with. So when you register your domain name, I've used a company called DirectNic. So DirectNic.com. It's a local company. They're in New Orleans, in Louisiana.
Okay.
So when I register something with them, by default, of course, they're going to want to use their own name servers. And the name servers are, if I go to look up an IP address, or if I go look up a name, google.com, Google has name servers. Those name servers tell people where to look for your records. So your name servers are important. Wherever your name servers are, that's going to be basically, I'm trying to think of the best way to explain this. I'm trying to do it to where it's not confusing because it does get confusing.
Right.
So let's just go to the example. Let's say you register Podnutz or whatever.com address. Let's just use example.com.
Okay.
When you do that, when you register with, let's say, DirectNic, by default, the name servers are DirectNic name servers because that you registered your domain name with them.
Right.
And for the most part, that's fine. Let your domain registrar handle DNS is my recommendation.
For a public site. For public site.
public stuff.
Right.
So you can leave it that way. That's fine. So when the next step is once you have your domain name registered, by default, they're going to have their own name servers. You're going to have to pay for DNS service. Sometimes it's included with your domain name. Sometimes it's not. If it's not, it's usually like $5 a year or something.
It better be included, I think.
Well, you know, it might be a few dollars a year.
Okay.
You know, and that's, you know, like DirectNick, I think it was $5 a year. So it's not that much. And actually, depending on what you need to do, there is some companies have where you can create a few records for free. And for a few sites, and really for small business server, you only need a few records. And here's what you're going to have. So when you register your domain name, you can have DNS service. You need an MX record. An MX record is a mail exchange record. It tells people where your mail server is. And you need a couple of A records. That's just basically an A record maps directly a name to an IP address. So the only records you usually need in a small business server, if you have and I might even just pull up somebody. I might pick on somebody. I might just pick a domain name and pick on somebody.
Okay.
I'm pulling one up on my computer right now.
Yeah, no problem. So this is what we're covering now. Is
setting up your DNS records to go with your domain.
Gotcha.
And so remember, the first step was to register the domain name.
Mm-hmm.
The next step is to create records. And what this is for is when somebody emails you, you want it to go to your Exchange server.
Right.
Let's see. I'm gonna
pick?
I'm not gonna tell about what the domain name is. 'Cause I'm just picking one.
Okay.
Okay. So you usually want to create an A record, or the first A record you're going to create is an A record to be where your website is going to be. Now, I don't recommend having your website be hosted on your small business server. You know, go ahead and pay for web hosting offsite.
Okay.
That's my recommendation.
Yes, and I totally agree, because one reason for that, especially with small business server, it already functions as a domain controller. It already does several services, and the last thing you want to do is to attach it by doing web hosting. So I totally agree with that.
And to have the public come in and hitting your small business server, because we all know that there's holes in every operating system. So just having a public-facing website is one less thing you're not going to worry about if you don't do it. Now, if you want to have another server on your network, that's fine too. You know,
that would still be using up your bandwidth, though, right?
It's still using up your bandwidth. I like to host it offsite. Web hosting is cheap.
Yes.
You know, put a website somewhere else. So your first A record, let's just use, I'm going to use podnutz.com as an example. You usually want an A record for just podnutz.com. That IP address that matches that is going to point to whatever your web hosting company tells you to point it to. So when you sign up for web hosting somewhere, it'll say, here's your IP address, point your A record here.
Okay.
So podnutz.com and a www.podnutz.com is going to point to the same thing pretty much.
Okay.
Okay. Let's just say, and I don't know if it's true or not, let's just say the MX record for Podnutz is mail.podnutz.com. I don't know if it is. It's just an example.
Mm-hmm.
So an MX record is a mail exchange record, and this always points to a name. Okay. MX records don't point to IP addresses. So if you looked up an MX record for, let me see. You mind if I tell you yours, Steve?
As long as it doesn't hurt me.
Yeah, yours is mail.podnutz.com.
Okay.
No, and it's just public knowledge. Anybody can search for this stuff online. It's just it's public record.
Okay.
So yeah, so yours is mail.podnutz.com.
Mm-hmm.
So MX records point to names. In your case, as in most cases that we set up, mail.podnutz.com. But mail.podnutz.com has to exist. we can't just point an MX record to mail.podnutz.com. So you also have to create an A record for mail.podnutz.com. And that points to an IP address.
Okay.
And that IP address that mail.podnutz.com would point to would be your public address that you have on your network from your ISP.
Okay.
So the other two records for the website, A records are pointed to wherever wherever your web hosting tells you to. A record for mail.podnutz.com would point to your own public IP that's assigned to your network. And of course, maybe I didn't say this. When you do a small business server, you need to get a static IP address from your ISP. And you just need one. A lot of ISPs might sell you 5 or 10. Most small businesses just need one static IP address.
Okay.
So mail.podnutz.com, A record would point to that. The MX record would point to mail.podnutz.com. Now, sometimes people run into issues if they make what's called a CNAME record. It's just a different kind of record. You can still have a CNAME record that says mail.podnutz.com pointing to your IP address, but the MX record needs to point to a record. So, and that's unless when you're creating DNS records, they're usually always A records unless you tell it differently. So that's not common. I haven't seen that very much. Usually I see that as somebody just for some reason changes a bunch of defaults when they're creating records.
Right.
Another thing that you need to do when you're setting up your mail is with your ISP. So if you say your MX record is mail.podnutz.com, your ISP gave you a static IP address. When they give you that static IP address, you need to tell your ISP, I want to create a reverse DNS entry. A reverse DNS entry maps an IP address to a name. It's backwards from DNS. So normally you would type in a name and it maps to an IP address. A reverse entry maps an IP address to a name.
Okay.
So let's just say I have no idea what your record is. Let's just say it's 98.232.45.21. That's just a made-up number.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just say that that's your public IP address on your network.
Okay.
Okay. So mail.podnutz.com would point to that IP address. Now, the only people who can create reverse DNS entries are the people who own the IP address, and that's your ISP. So reverse DNS entries are a way that other people can verify that mail is coming from who it says it's coming from.
Okay.
So you tell them, look, create a reverse entry. They might call it a pointer for mail.podnutz.com. So you tell them, look, the IP address you just gave me, reverse entry should be mail.podnutz.com. And it's usually pretty simple. They usually understand what you're talking about, but they may not. That's where you just ask to speak to someone else.
Okay.
And it's usually pretty simple. They'll do it in 24 hours. And the reason you want to do this is if you email somebody, a lot of people have checks in place to filter for spam.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that the spam engines do is do reverse lookup on your domain name. So let's say you email me and let's just say info@podnutz.com.
Mm-hmm.
In the headers, it says that podnutz.com should go back to this IP address. So my spam filtering system does reverse lookup on podnutz.com. It finds the IP or mail.podnutz.com. It finds the IP address and it looks to see if that's where you're sending mail from.
Okay.
So it won't kill the mail. It may add a little bit to your spam score. So it may raise your spam score. It may raise the likelihood that it's spam. But I've seen it where it pushes over the edge.
If it's not coming from that, it's spam?
Well, it might raise your spam score. So every message, if you're doing spam filtering, has a spam score. Even the built-in stuff in Outlook has a spam score.
If it doesn't come from
right, it
IP,
may raise your spam score by like 0.5,
uh-huh.
where it may put it in quarantine at 3.
Okay.
And if you don't have a reverse entry, that value may be 0.5.
Okay.
But I have seen it to where it does push over the edge and it might reject some mail. You know, that spam filtering, we'll get into it another show, but just interestingly enough, a lot of things add to your spam score that people don't know. You know, not having a name on your email address. So if you email somebody and it shows up that it's coming from info@podnutz.com instead of your name, that raises the score.
Okay.
If you use all capital letters, that raises your score. If you don't have a subject, that raises your score.
Right.
You know, a lot of those little things can add up, and it could be a false positive that it's spam.
Right.
And not having a reverse entry can just add to the score.
Gotcha.
So we always set up reverse entries. And it's easy to see if you have reverse entry from any computer on the network. If you just go to www.ipchicken.com, it'll give you your public IP address, and it'll also tell you what your reverse entry is. Now, most of those things, so under current IP address, if you do it, I'm not sure if people are doing it, but if you'll see current IP address and you'll see your public IP address. Below that, under advanced, you'll see name address, and it'll be a name.
Right.
If you've got a reverse entry, it'll say something. If it says something, some kind of gobbledygook, it's just the reverse entry that's given to you by default by your ISP.
Gotcha.
It'll be some crazy long thing,
Yeah.
you know, .br, .coxnet, you know, something like that.
Right. Right.
That means they didn't create one if you told them to. If you see what you told them here, they did it right. If not, then they didn't do it right.
Okay.
Let's see. You know, Open DNS. You know, like I said, by default you're going to use your ISPs, ISP number, your ISP DNS servers, and the forwarders. You can, if you want these Open DNS, there's a place where you can just substitute those. We don't do that a lot. We use other filtering. We talked about that on another show. If you're going to be doing a lot of domain registrations and managing a lot of DNS, you know, I'd recommend getting some kind of reseller account so you can make a little money on this. If you're just doing a few businesses and you're just starting out, I would just pick a domain name registrar and just do it with them. Create one account for each business so they're kind of separated.
Who do you use?
Well, we're a reseller. We use 2 Cows.
Okay.
We have a reseller account with them. So that all of our domains are under our reseller account.
I see. And you could brand that to your own business name.
Yes, but that's not something that customers ever see.
Right. Oh, okay.
I mean, they'll never see it.
Gotcha.
But if they wanted to, let's say, take their domain name and leave, you know, let's say they wanted to have somebody else do their work for them, you know, I can't have customers log in and manage their own DNS on my account because I'd have to give them my login, and I have hundreds of domains. So
let me get this straight. I'm a little confused, to be frank. Let me just get this straight, because my understanding breaks down is the point between public and your own network. So when you're talking about domain on your own network, that's just Podnutz, okay? But if we're talking about public, then I'd have to register podnutz.com. So my network name is Podnutz, like podnutz.local, whatever that was, and then my domain name publicly is podnutz.com. It's connected. I mean, like, use the
no, they're not connected.
You use this, so you don't use the same domain. It'll be your public facing, whatever is. I'm confused.
Right. The podnutz.local, wherever your name is .local, is used to internal use only. The public never ever sees that, and that's why some folks make the mistake when they create the domain. They'll put lalo.com for internal use, and where you run into a problem is when you look for computer1.lalo.com, it thinks that it's out there on the internet, when in actuality it's the office down.
I see. So everybody in America could have Podnutz as the name of their domain on their network.
Yes,
right.
Podnutz.local.
Podnutz.local.
And you would never know, right? Because that's not registered anywhere. That's just a local for your network only, just inside your network.
Okay,
you know, yeah,
that's kind of what I thought. But so when you're talking about, email MX servers and stuff like that, you need to register. You need to register. You're talking about that's public. You need to register that as a domain name.
Right. Everything.com, you need to register.
Right.
That's
Okay.
all public. So that way, if you keep everything.com public, everything.local is private.
Right.
.local stuff does not need to register with anybody. That's just something you type in on your
Right.
server when you're setting it up.
Okay.
And that's the reason you do .local is to keep them separate. So .com, you have to of course you have to register a .com or a .net address.
Right. Okay. I'm good.
So yeah. Now what happens is, of course, mail.podnutz.com, as we said, is a record that just points to your that's the only kind of tie-in between public and private.
Okay.
Is where mail.podnutz.com points to your public IP address that you have on your router,
Mm-hmm.
and that just sends it in. Your Exchange server is going to accept mail because you've told it to, and you told your Exchange server to accept mail for podnutz.com.
Okay.
So if anything's coming in the other, there's ways for spammers to try and get mail past your, you tell your Exchange server podnutz.com is my email domain. You shouldn't accept mail from anybody else, but of course there's ways around that,
Right. And
as everybody knows. But that's how it's supposed to work.
right. And another piece of information that Matt said that is critical. If you own a business, you should have a static IP address. A lot of you may ask, well, why is that? Well, imagine if you configure your A records or whatever the case may be, or when, if podnutz.com is this IP address, then it changes the month or 3 months after, and then you're going to have trouble finding your mail server, if that makes any sense. So that's why most the businesses, when you let's sign up for a business plan, they'll give you a static IP because that never changes. You got routers and other pieces of equipment that need a static IP. That number does not change or does not need to change.
I see.
If that makes any sense.
Right.
Yeah.
It should change. It does change, unfortunately. But when it does change, you have to know what changes you have to make to get things working again.
Exactly.
So I had over here this past week, we come into the office Monday morning. I've got 3 or 4 clients calling me, telling me they can't get email, or they can't get online. So typical thing, power cycle of the router, doesn't work, can't get on. You go on site, do the troubleshooting, and I realized, okay, we're not on the internet. So one of the things I do in this when I'm troubleshooting, if everything else works internally, I go into the router, I document. Of course, I already have it documented what their public IP is, so I can put it back. But one thing, I just set it to DHCP, the router, and I'm online. Okay. So now I know there's a problem with my IP address. Call the ISP, and they say, oh, yeah, we had a problem over the weekend with our IP addresses, so here's your new IP address. And you say, well, that's not very convenient for my customer because now I got to change DNS records. Those have to propagate around, so they're going to have intermittent connect,
I see.
Exactly.
So, and they say, well, they should have called you. And of course, then I say, I agree they should have called us, but they didn't. We had to come in this morning and troubleshoot that we can't get online. The ISPs, the guy talking on the phone, it's not his fault.
All right.
So, you really can't go off on him too much. They're just answering phones and they're trying to get you back online. So when it does happen and a company does get a new IP address, it's better if it's planned. Sometimes it's not. They're just going to say, here's your new IP address.
Exactly. And
Now, the only thing you have to change normally is the only thing that points to your network is that mail.podnutz.com A record. So you have to, of course, go into your DNS console. You just change it from the old IP address to the new IP address. And that's pretty much it. DNS will propagate and you'll start getting your mail. Now, of course, you got to make the changes in your router to get online. But as far as DNS goes, that's the only change you need to make.
Gotcha. What were you going to say, Lau?
Oh, no. And I was going to add to like your story. There was the one time talking about a static IP address. We had 4 offices. And the corporate office, something happened over the weekend and it changed the public IP address. Now we have VPNs going to each office. So imagine this circle of a network going across the country, corporate network that goes down, and like Matt said, I called the ISP and they go, "Oops, something happened and we changed your IP." So we have to log into 3 other routers for the 3 remote offices and reestablish that route. So just changing the static IP address can cause chaos depending on what kind of network and what kind of environment you have going on. So
Right, and and actually, one of the companies that we had to change this for was one of the police departments, the city police department. The ISP changed theirs, and they've got VPNs to all over the place. One of them back to the some state headquarters where you have to actually go fill out all kind of paperwork to change the IP address, and it takes time for this to process. So their connection back to the state computers could be down for weeks while the paperwork goes through to change his IP address because somebody with the ISP just decided we can't give this back to you.
ISPs.
So,
Gotta love it.
and of course the customer is going to complain to you because you're the one there.
Right. Of course.
So, you have to explain to them it nicely. They changed your agreement with your ISP is they give you an IP address. Nowhere in that contract to say you're going to have it forever. So they changed it. So now it's going to force us to do this. So, and I tell them, if you want to take it up with your ISP, you're free to do that. You don't need me for that. If you want to call customer service and voice your concerns to them, that's apart from me. So Let me just get this back up and running, and then you can take it up with them.
Like they would know what to ask. I bet a lot of them
Well,
don't even know.
They know what they know. They call and complain and say my IP address was changed, and I just tell them they changed your IP address. Everything that's happening now is because they changed your IP address.
Blame them.
Yeah. So imagine if the phone company just calls and tells you one day, "Hey, you know what? Your phone number you've had for 10 years. Here's your new phone number."
I wish they do that.
So call all your customers. Tell them when they call you, it's almost like they say, "Now is a recording. Your phone number has been changed." So imagine the phone company changed your phone number and doesn't put that message.
Right.
So people just call the number and they get number's been disconnected.
Right.
Because when somebody's trying to email them, they just get a bounce back saying, "Cannot find destination server."
Gotcha.
So,
Cool.
It happens,
Yeah.
It doesn't happen often, but I find that if you're doing a lot of businesses and, like in my area, there's pretty much 3 ISPs. There's Cox Cable, there's DSL Connection, and we have LUS Fiber. So if one of them makes a major change, it's going to affect usually quite a few of our customers. So with a few hundred businesses that we support, even if it's just one block that they change, I'm going to get 5, 6 phone calls from different companies.
Right.
And you got to go out, change the router, change the DNS, explain to them that what happened. Of course, their first thought is my server's not working. That's always their first thought. To them, everything's the server. They can't print, the server's not working. If my keyboards doesn't work, my server's down.
That's awesome.
Now in the troubleshooting, the things that you need when you're troubleshooting DNS, a lot of times I'll get a customer saying I can't email somebody or I can't get to a website. So some things, the email is the most common. You can use a site called mxtoolbox.com or dnsstuff.com. DNS stuff, I think you have to pay to get more of the features. It's like $12 a year. Okay. But these 2 sites offer a lot of information about a domain name. So if I'm trying to email if a customer calls me and say I'm trying to email somebody, or even if they say I can't email you, then you can go in here and look at a few things. One, are they on a blacklist? That's the first thing I check for. If people can't email my customer, are they on a blacklist? If not, then you gotta look further. But a lot of times, if my customer can't email somebody else, I'll check their domain name? Is it a valid domain name? Did the domain name expire? I look at their DNS records? Can I access their records? A lot of times it happens, somebody forgets to register a domain, re-register a domain name. The domain name expires. Or since the DNS service is usually a separate service, their DNS service may expire. So the domain name is still there, but their DNS service expired if they're not lined up together.
I see.
So I've seen that happen. You can use a tool from the command prompt, NS lookup, which stands for name server lookup.
Okay.
The most common thing I do with that is I'm going to look up an MX record real quick if I don't feel like going to the website. So you just type in NS lookup, hit enter. I'm looking for an MX record, so I do set space Q equals MX, hit enter. And then I put in the domain name and hit enter. So let's just say I put in podnutz.com.
Okay.
When I did it here on yours, that's how I saw that your MX record is mail.podnutz.com. It'll also tell me what your name servers are. So I can tell from the name server you're using hostgator.com to host as hosting.
Yes.
So, a lot of times if I have a customer with a problem, just by using NS lookup real quick, I can see what their MX record is. I can see what their name servers are.
Huh.
So and especially if you go into a company where you didn't set it up, I guarantee you they're not going to know who their DNS service is with. But just by using this NS lookup or MX Toolbox or DNS stuff, I can see what your name server is, hostgator.com. So now at least I know where to go. I go to hostgator.com and try and get a login for that if it's a DNS issue.
Okay.
Or if I need to change DNS records.
Right.
If a customer says I'm trying to email info@podnutz.com and I can't do it, I do this. I see the MX record is mail.podnutz.com. I see if I can ping that. If I can or can't, that might tell me something. You can't be too quick to dismiss it because you might have ping turned off. So if I can't ping it, it doesn't really mean it's not working.
Right.
It just means you may have ping turned off. So that's a starting place to see what the records are. Are they valid records? Things like that. Another thing I've seen is if, let's say a customer is not using Exchange Server.
Okay.
And they use, well, it doesn't really matter. Let's say they're using Cox, over here, or Bell South does it a lot.
Okay.
I've seen having Bell South a lot. A company is using Bell South as their ISP, and Bell South sells them a domain name for email. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So they sell them company.com, and they host the mail for them, and they host the DNS records. Okay. But then they want to change to Cox Internet, and they want to take their domain name with them because they bought it.
Mm-hmm.
So you go through the process of changing company.com over to being hosted somewhere else. We have to request the domain name transfer. We create the DNS records on our servers. Okay. And it's all moved. 2 months later, a customer or somebody else who has Bell South is trying to email my customer, and they keep getting the bounce back. And of course, they don't tell you I'm on Bell South and I'm having trouble emailing you. They say I can't email you. So you have to, of course, and it involves the person trying to send the mail. You have to work with them too. If they have a tech guy, you can ask to speak to their tech guy. If not, you got to work with the customer. And eventually you find out, well, you're on Bell South ISP. And they say, yes. Okay. So here's what happens. When they transferred your domain name off somewhere else, Bell South or wherever the ISP was doesn't delete your DNS records. So to everybody on Bell South, your mail record is still what they had before.
Okay.
Which if they hosted their mail for them,
mm-hmm.
It's not there anymore. We moved it to an Exchange server. So let's just say I moved it to 98.232.45.21, which is your public IP. But as far as Bell South is concerned, they're still hosting the mail. So I've seen that happen a lot with a few ISPs, mainly Bell South in this area, if they don't bother going back and deleting the records. So the fix is identify that all the people who can't email you are on your old ISP. Then you have to call the ISP and say, look, you have DNS records still created. I need you to delete them. And of course, the tech's going to draw a blank and not have any idea what you're talking about. He's going to say, what's your account number? And of course, you got to go through that. I don't have an account. I used to have an account. Oh, do you want to talk to new accounts? No.
Do you want to talk to new accounts?
I need you to delete all of the DNS records for this domain. And, you know, it takes a while, but eventually you get through to somebody who can delete it. But that's happened quite a few times if your mail is hosted somewhere else and you try and move it.
Okay.
So when you move it, and you can tell them when you're moving it, after the you know, maybe if you want to call and be proactive, call them back, or even do an NS lookup. The problem is, well, it's complicated, but with NS lookup, you can tell it to look up what Bell South thinks the IP address is.
Okay.
And I'm not gonna get into all that. You know, you can go to NS lookup and look at the command options. But by default, when you do NS lookup, it's gonna use your DNS server to look it up. So, but there's ways to say, no, instead of using my DNS server to look up this, and you have to get Bell South DNS servers, use these servers to look it up. And if it comes back with something different, you know they still have records created.
Okay.
So, or you can wait till people with Bell South can't email you.
Right. Right.
Because it's not common, but it does happen. I've had it happen more times than I can count, so it's happened quite a few times. But it's always been with Bell South.
Really? Now this is good that you have the experience in this, so this is good stuff. Do you want to go over anything else, Mac? I mean, I do have emails, just so you know. We got 3.
Anything, Lalo, that I think need to expand upon, Lalo? Or
No, I think you did a good job. Let's want to focus a little bit on like the troubleshooting. Again, if you have a host internally in your network, and what you want to make sure is that the DHCP is correct. The first DNS entry should be a local server. Doing like the NS lookup is a great idea. Not that you'll find this in a small business server environment and bigger environments. Someone might have just put up a DNS, the server that shouldn't be. So you can see which DNS server is providing you that request back. Simple stuff, IP config, release, and renew. You know, a lot of times if someone does make a change on the server, doing a release and renew gives you a new IP address in the event a DNS server changed overnight. So these are a lot of small things that you can check out. Back to what you were saying, if you can't ping a host of mail.podnutz.com, what he's saying is that the ICMP is blocked. And you might say, what the hell is that? Some of the routers, they block ICMP traffic. That's traffic, that's your pings, that's your ARPs, that's your a lot of the tools that we commonly use. But you can do a trace route to that same address, and you can see if it's leaving your network. Okay, if it's leaving your network, then the problem is not internal; it's something external. So, and of course,
right.
with the DNS, we can talk about this for hours. It gets really involved, and there's books and books about it. But I think we did a good job of covering the basics.
One more thing when you're troubleshooting web browsing, you know, a lot of people just try and open up. I get a lot of calls. The internet's down. Okay. So the first thing I try and do is I try and connect to their network using RDP, because we have RDP connections set up to all of our servers. And if I can connect to that, I know the internet's not down because I can connect to the server. So what I'll have once I connect, because I'm connecting, well, it doesn't matter how I'm connecting, but once I'm on, I try and browse the internet. If I can't browse the internet, I try and do a ping by IP address. So get an IP address. You know, it's good to have one that you know is going to return a response. So ping an IP address. If you get a response back, the internet's not down. It's just a problem with DNS. One thing to check on the server, there is a service that's DNS server. You can see if that's running. It stopped maybe a few times. I've seen it stop. If that stopped, start it, because that's what's going to return the response to you.
Okay.
If that's if that's fine, then you can try it. It might be just the DNS servers with your ISP are down. ISPs change their DNS server sometimes, and the way they notify you is normally email you at whatever, if you have Cox, whatever you set up at cox.com, which no one ever checks in business because it's just a default account set up to be able to get service. But yet, that seems to be how they communicate with their customers. So they may have sent a notice saying, we're going to change your DNS records effective this date. Well, no one checks that, so you don't know.
Right.
So it's possible they may have changed their DNS server. So, first, if I can connect to them, the internet's not down. So then I need to see if it's a DNS issue locally or if it's the ISP's DNS address that's having an issue. And sometimes if you're on the server, just look and see what your DNS forwarders are. See if you can ping those servers. If you can't ping the DNS server, it's probably not a right server. Because those are usually, you can ping them. I mean, usually ping is turned on for that kind of stuff.
Also, do an ipconfig /flush on DNS, and what that would do, if there's anything cached is incorrect on the machine, a lot of times I've seen that resolve a lot of issues. What people used to do too is use host files. Host files are stored on the local machine or on the server. If you go under C drive, Windows, System32, drivers, the Etsy folder, what people used to do is hard code the name space IP address, and that way they didn't have to use a DNS. They could say computer 1 is this IP address all the way down, and that's how they communicated. That's how a lot of people used to do it, but that's also how stuff can break, because an IP address or host name can change. Then all of a sudden you have to go and modify all of these host files. There's some viruses in the past where I've seen that they actually modified this host file. And correct me if I'm wrong, the local machine will check the host file first if there's anything there. Then at that point, it'll go to a DNS.
Right. It checks the local host file first.
Okay.
Cool.
Yeah, and that's why that spyware and viruses, that's why they put their stuff in there first. Yeah. It's easy to edit, and they know it's going to check that first.
Exactly.
You can also do ipconfig space /display DNS, and that's going to display the records that are currently in the that it knows about.
Right.
So sometimes on the server, if for some reason I can't ping computer 1, I could do an ipconfig from computer 1 or release and renew, and it shows me it's getting a certain IP address. I have seen a few instances when I do a display DNS on the server, it should display the right name and IP address, but it doesn't. It has something different. In that case, you flush it, and then it's one of the rare instances where you have to go into DNS and see if there's a record that is still in DNS for computer1.podnutz.local and delete it. That's only happened a couple times. For some reason, it just doesn't deregister when it gets a new one. So you might see an A record for computer 1 that has 1.6 and another A record that has got 1.8.
Right.
And 1.8's the correct one, but it has 2 of them in there. So that's rare, but you sometimes do have to go into the DNS console. Cool. Normally, the only thing I go into the DNS console for is to change the forwarders if I'm putting new public DNS servers in.
Cool.
Let's see. There was something else, Lala, when you were talking that I thought about, but I can't think what it is now.
Think about it, Matt. I'll read an email while you're thinking.
Okay.
This is from Marv. He says, Mad Marv. Love that name. Thought you would be interested in sharing this with your Podnutz Pro listeners. In the trenches, IIT was a show about system administration for IT professionals. It was one of the very first podcasts running from 2004 October to around 2005 and 2006. In the Trenches was produced by Kevin Devin and George Starcher. They were system admins who shared the tips and tricks they picked up on the job to help other IT pros. An archive of their shows can be found in the Internet Archive through the link below, and that's archive.org/bookmarks/kevin.devin. Yeah, I heard about that show, actually. I heard it was really good, and they pod faded, and a lot of people were upset about that. So, you know, if they're not going to pick it up, then somebody's got to keep carrying the load. So that's what we're trying to do here. But check out that show. I've never listened to it personally because I'm not an admin, but I hear good things about it. So thank you, Marv. All right. Should I go to the next one?
Sure.
Andrew says, hey, Steve, quick question about Podnutz Pro. Was listening to the latest episode, and Matt mentioned shadow copies as a backup. Wondering if you can explain either how to set this up in Windows XP and for general purposes how this works, or the concept. Basically, explain this a little more, what it is, and more of an explanation. That's pretty much it. He wants some explaining. Done.
Okay. Yeah, shadow copies are in 03 small business server and 08 small, and I think it can be turned on for other servers. But in 03 small business server and 08 small business server, I think it's not on for your system drive by default, but your other drive. So, you know, like I said before, we have an array just for the system, and then we have an array for data. So on your non-system drives, shadow copies is on by default. If you have enough hard drive space, it makes shadow copies. It's actually a copy of every file in that share.
Okay.
So and by default, it's going to take snapshots of the data at 7 a.m. and noon, and it's a way from the workstation to go to a file, or if you deleted the file, you go to the folder. You can right-click on it, go to properties, and if it's turned on and set up right, you'll see a tab that says previous versions. In there, it's going to list every snapshot that it has. As long as you have hard drive space, it can go back quite a ways, and you can restore right from there. You can restore the whole folder, or if we deleted a file or a previous version of a folder or a previous version of a file. So if you're working on a Word document and you opened it at 8 a.m. and screwed it up, you could go back to how it was at 7 o'clock. Or if we deleted the file completely, you could go to the previous versions of the containing folder, and then in there it says view. You can view the contents of the folder as it was at 7 o'clock or the previous day, whatever, however many points you have, and you can restore that file. So it's a quick way not to have to go back to tape, but you have to have enough hard drive space for it to keep those shadow copies. And by default, you know, if you got a 300 gig array and you've got 10 gigs of data, you're going to have plenty of space to go back for quite a while for these previous versions.
Cool.
A real useful way. We restore most of our stuff through shadow copies, not through tape.
Huh.
Because most people are deleting one file here, one file there.
Right.
Most of our stuff is done through shadow copies. And you can show the customer how to do it themselves, but they're not going to remember.
Right.
Right.
I mean, I've shown people 20 times, and it's usually the same people that delete stuff. So you can show them, you know, I can even connect to their computer and show them, this is how you do it. They're going to do the same thing. Because it's so infrequent they do it, they might do it a week later and they forgot. Now, the bad thing is, you know, they can restore whatever they want if they have rights to it. So they may go in there by accident and restore the whole contents of the accounting share to how it was last Thursday at 7 a.m., which is usually not going to be pretty good.
Exactly.
Unless they were trying to do that. So,
and that's why in the environments that I've been in, I tend to don't show people how to do that. And to answer his question, he had mentioned XP. You can't do shadow copy in XP, but there's a client that you can install that will allow you to do shadow copy on a network share, if that makes any sense. Because he had worded that question a little bit different, as if it was like available in XP.
Right.
And Windows 7, it's available for the client. I don't know about Vista. I played with La Vista with all 32 seconds before I threw it out.
I'm not sure. I think it's enabled. I think it does it, but it's not enabled or something kind of crazy
Right,
that.
like Matt was saying, like the C drive is not enabled by default unless you go in there and actually enable that. Some people do, some people don't. But if you have a secondary drive, you can definitely enable that.
Yeah, I don't like shares on C drive anyway, so
I agree.
we don't put it on. We just leave that for the system only.
I agree.
All right, let me play a voicemail here. I gotta load up my Google Voice. Give me 1 sec. My whole voicemail thing is not totally configured yet, so it's a little bit of a roundabout thing. Here we go. This is from, well, we'll find out. Here's the voicemail.
Hey, Podnutz. This is Derek from FireLogic.net. I just wanted to say that the new Podnutz Pro show is very good. It keeps me pretty intrigued. I really like the content you guys are going over on the show. And I just wanted to make a suggestion for 2 topics that I myself would like to see covered in maybe one of the upcoming episodes. And I'm sure a lot of other techs out there are interested in this, and that involves both Exchange and Active Directory in regards to installation, configuration, as well as troubleshooting. I was just curious if you'd be able to do maybe a 1 or 2 series show on each of the topics that I mentioned. I know they always give me a lot of problems when I run into them, and it'd be nice if you'd be able to provide some insight on those 2. All right, thanks a lot. Keep up the great work, and I'll definitely be listening in on all the upcoming episodes. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Derek. That's Derek Lodars. He's been on a couple shows before. Good suggestions. I have heard interest in Active Directory many times in the past, just for people wanting to hear it on Podnutz. It's not something we would cover, but it might be something more geared towards this show.
I will say that
Definitely right, because when you install, I think we'll eventually have shows, on the initial install, the steps you'll go through to install a small business server.
Right.
And of course, in the process of doing that, what you can end up with is an Active Directory environment. So
okay, so it's just Derek, hang on to your seat. It will be happening in the future.
Yeah, but I do know that the AD and the Change are pretty involved, the topics, so they'll probably cover like a few shows, but it's something, if you don't work with on a daily basis, it can kind of take you on pretty hard. So
yeah, and it's a lot different if you're talking about 08 small business server. They changed the management up from 03 small business server. Right. So, I guess we'd have to pick one and then have examples for that, and then mainly just how you get to things are different. I'm not a fan of what they did for 08 server, but you got to deal with what they have. So
cool. All right. Well, if you'd want to send us if anybody wants to send us voicemails, you can do it at call on a regular phone 7076 Podnut. 7076 Podnut will get you the Podnutz voice line. If you want to send us an email us at mail@podnutz.com. We will read it on the show, no matter how crazy it is. And Matt, where can people find you if they want to contact you for anything?
My website is A as in Apple, H as in Henry, -computers.com.
Awesome. And are you still active on Twitter?
Yeah, sometimes.
Okay. All right.
I get so busy, and I just forget to well, my goal would be to be, as I'm doing a job, just have a little thing related to that job.
Yeah.
I think I tweeted one earlier this week about all the ISP changes. No,
I gotta say, Twitter is the thing Twitter's a great thing to want to start to do. That's what Twitter's famous for. Everybody who says, I'm going to start a Twitter account. It's so easy to start using Twitter. Maintaining Twitter, different story. I understand. We're all busy. I mean, come on. All right, Lala, where can people find you if they want to?
My site is back up and running. It's lalonunez.com. My email address is lalo@lalonunez.com. Have any questions that I can cover? I changed the theme of my site, just make a long story short, kind of do tips. So if I come across something that worked that was kind of cool, I'll probably post it up there. So
awesome. So these two guys are great resources. I definitely recommend you avail yourself of their knowledge, guys. And is there anything else we need to cover, guys, before we end off?
I'm good.
No, well, maybe just a quick recap. Like I said, DNS does not need to be complicated. It can be complicated, but for a small business server, remember just the two A records that point back to your website. So in our example, podnutz.com and www.podnutz.com, that goes to where your website's hosted. An A record for your whatever you make up. It can be whatever, mail.podnutz.com, it doesn't matter. You're making this up. smtp.podnutz.com, it's up to you. Whatever that is, your MX record points to that, and an A record. So if you make up mail.podnutz.com for your MX record, make sure you have an A record that defines what that is. That is the only one that points back to your network. And that's all that you need to do to get mail getting to your Exchange server.
Cool. All right. Thanks for the wrap up. Anything else, guys?
Good.
Well, I think that is going to be it for today's episode of Podnutz Pro. Thank you all for watching, listening, streaming. See you next time.